I am starting this series of my research journey with the first of the most exciting studies that I had done. This study was to understand the relationship between perceived organizational climate and level of aspiration of small scale industry workers and its relationship with their productivity. I think very understandable issue used to be raised in mid 60s at the Small Industry Extension Training Institute. What causes productivity among employees? And by the time there were a lot of researches in management which indicated if the organizational climate is positive, those who perceive the organizational climate in positive ways are likely to be perceiving exhibiting more of productivity. Similarly, those who have a high level of aspiration, who want to improve their standard of living, etc., are likely to be more productive. Is this true? So, a research study was undertaken by actually two of us, my classmate Hari Gopal, when we were students of MA Psychology at Osmania University. The project was sponsored by the SIET Institute, and Dr. Somnath Chattopadhyay was our guide from SIET, and Dr. N.Y. Reddy was the guide from Osmania University. The study lasted almost across about 3 and odd months, if I recollect. For this purpose, we chose 4 units in industrial area of Hyderabad, Sanat Nagar and around, and 4 other units from a non-industrial area which are located in different residential area closer to the university site. So all these 4 units are manufacturing different kinds of products. Each of them had a good number of workers, but our sample consisted of something like about 20% in each of the companies, which is about 15 of them. On an average, let's say each of these industries had about 50 to 60 workers and a few supervisors and a manager. So we picked up about 12 randomly selected workmen from each one of these units. Similarly, we picked up about 3 of their supervisors. We couldn't, of course, may not have got all 100% of it. We finally included 22 supervisors from these 8 units and 9 managers from these 8 units. So totaling to about 157 is the sample size of 8 units. Now the question is, how do you measure the perceived organizational climate? That was a time when Rensis' book on New Patterns of Management came. Quite a few people talked about various variables involved in organizational climate. These include whether the climate is motivating or is it fear arousing, reprimanding, and so on. What are the kind of work conditions I have? Is it a secure climate? And so on. A whole lot of variables that are there, including work conditions, supervisory behavior, and things like that. We identified a large number of items and presented it to people who are associated with the small scale industry and asked them to identify the relevance of each of these items after explaining the purpose of the study, that we want to link the productivity of employees with the organizational climate. Please identify, in your opinion, which of these items are likely to constitute a good representation of the organizational climate. And they should be contemporary, and organizational climate is a variable that also has some kind of a sustained presence of it. You don't want to take a climate which something that happens at a particular point of time and it may not be there after some time and so on. So we define organizational climate as a lasting characteristic of the organization which is likely to have a positive or a negative impact on the worker. So using judges, we identified a large number of items. And the most important learning at this point of time is that most of these workmen are either illiterate or could only speak in a local language, which is Telugu. So after we developed the questionnaire in English, the challenge was to get it translated into local language Telugu. So we employed two different translators who were conversant with both English and Telugu, and requested them to translate into Telugu. After both these uh, people have translated into Telugu, we gave the Telugu versions to two other translators and asked them to retranslate it into English. And we compared the original English version with the translated English version from Telugu and picked up only those items which indicated the closeness of the translated English version to the original version. There were a few items on which there were some differences, so we discussed with the translators and finalized this. Now, this is a question of, I think this is a methodological issue of how do you establish reliability of a questionnaire when you translate it to another language. I think this was an interesting learning that we have had at the time. So that is the way we finalized the organizational climate questionnaire. And after the organizational climate questionnaire, we had to measure level of aspiration. Those were the years when Cantril and Freeze, hopes and fears technique was very popular. And Cantril and Free have by the time already studied a large number of countries, hopes and fears or aspirations of people, and came up with this culture-free level of aspiration test, in which it starts by asking people, think of your future, imagine it in the best possible light, maybe 5 years from now, 10 years from now, how would you describe your future to be in the best possible light? Similarly, the worst happens, how would you describe what it would look like? So this set two anchors, and then we ask the question, if these are the two anchors, this is the best possible light, this is the worst possible light, where do you stand today? Where were you 3 years ago or 5 years ago? And where do you want to be 5 years from now? I think this is interesting. It gave a number of categories. It includes that your past may be better than the present, and your future may be better than the present, or your future may be worse than the present. So your future frustrated, or your past frustrated because your past was bad, current was better, and so on. I think there were all kinds of categories. The level of aspiration is really the gap between where you want to be and where you are now. This was measured on a 10-point scale, and this was then correlated with the productivity. Now, in small scale industries, if every industry is manufacturing different units and therefore they have different contexts, the question is, how do you measure the productivity of a group of workmen who are doing different kind of jobs, manufacturing different kind of products and things like that? We reviewed literature and we finally settled down. I think if you have to compare the productivity across industries, the only sensible technique we found was the amount of time a worker actually works or an employee is found working. That means use an observational method. At different intervals of time, go and see whether what the person is doing. If he is working, then he is productive. If he is not working, he is not working. So for that, of course, you need to understand a little bit of each person's role in order to decide what is work and what is not work. Okay. So sometimes somebody may be just going to fetch a tool, then you can consider it as a work. But if you don't know the context, then you might think that he is only lazing around and things like that. So we understood the nature of the work of each people and decided what to categorize as work when we observed them. Then we worked out a critical path. For example, in the industrial area, if 4 industries are located at, let's say, within half a kilometer distance, so you go to one industry and make one round of observations, observe 12 people, you work out the path of your observation. Like you start with A, go to B, then go to C, then go to F, etc. Work out the path of work sampling. This is the method called as work sampling. So all the 12 people, you complete your path and go to the second industry. Again, You work out the path and observe them. Go to the third industry, go to the fourth industry, and so on. So across different days, you will have to observe these people and compute the number of times you found them to be working. Let's say in a day, if you have made about 15 observations and you found a particular person working only 7 out of 15 times, then you calculate the percentage. Another person may be 13 out of 15 times, so you calculate the percentage. That is the work sampling method. It establishes at least the percentage of time you have been found working. This was a little more difficult in the non-industrial area because they were spread out, but even then we followed meticulously. If you have established the path, you complete one industry, go to the another factory, then complete that, then come back to the first one, and so on. So that is the way we measured productivity using work sampling method. So we had three measures: perceived organizational climate on a number of dimensions, level of aspiration, and productivity of the workmen, which included some supervisors and so on. Interestingly, at the end of the study, we did not find, we found quite a bit of variation. All these scores on organizational climate were normally distributed. Or similarly, I think aspirations were fairly distributed using the normal curve. And also the productivity was distributed, although on an average we found about 60 to 70% of the time we observed these people were working and so on. So one part of the research study is to study and present coefficients of correlation, or use a chi-square or whatever test you use, to test the association between background factors like age, marital status, educational level, training received, with perceived organizational climate, with level of aspiration, and with productivity and so on. We found out of the many background variables studied, one or two variables were associated with perceptions of organizational climate, all with level of aspiration and with the productivity. However, we didn't find any coefficient of correlation between organizational climate and productivity. So we had to conclude that perception of organizational climate is not necessarily related to productivity. Something else determines the productivity of the person and so on. So we also found that level of aspiration was not associated with productivity. Well, even if coefficients of correlations were not right, it was a great experience in terms of identifying methodology of studying aspirations levels, identifying dimensions of organizational climate, and also identifying productivity measures, and carrying out this particular research in a very significant way. I still remember this. This is a study that was conducted in the year 1966 and 67. Somnath Chattopadhyay, as mentioned, was our guide. N.Y. Reddy was a guide from Osmania University. Osmania facilitated this work. CET Institute financed this particular study. And this is available in a wonderful monograph. Even today, I feel proud about this particular piece of research. And sometimes I feel, when I go through the what we have written in those years, this is almost like a doctoral dissertation. Methodological rigor that we have used, the way we have tested out the questionnaires using different samples, where we established reliability of our interview methodology, and things of that nature. So this was a very interesting study of perception of organizational climate, level of aspiration, and its relationship with productivity in uncomparable small-scale industries. Friends, I am likely to be presenting in a short way studies like this that I have done subsequently. You can use this as a case study. If you are interested, get the original monograph from Academy of HRD, or you can write to me. I'll tell you where it is available, and use it to critique methodology. At least this will give you an idea of how research studies could be conducted and how they used to be conducted in old times. All the best, and as a researcher, and we expect great things from all of you researchers.